Thanks so much, Keith. We love being here on The Next Right Thing. I'm Debbie Giorgianni with Adam Blai. We are the co-hosts of The Spirit World. And Adam, we go over this topic from time to time because we have new listeners pretty much every time we do a live broadcast. And so it comes up a lot because there are podcasts that are circulating talking about these different degrees or different levels of demonic activity in people's lives. Could you go over the different levels and explain to all of us what they mean, how they can possibly pertain to us? And also, Adam, please do not forget to add how rare possession is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Deb. So the church over the centuries has been working these things out. These categories, they're not like hard and fast, absolute, here's a rigid line between these two things. They're kind of like a bucket, each idea meant to catch a range of different kind of phenomena, and there are things that border in between the two. And I'll explain that. But basically, the first most important thing to understand is that the ordinary activity of the demons is what all of us are going to deal with. And that ordinary activity, meaning it's their day-to-day job, so to speak, it's what God is allowing them to do on a day-to-day basis, is temptation. We should be much more concerned about temptation and sin than we should be thinking and talking about oppression and possession and demonic infestation. The average person, the bulk of the population, that's part of their spiritual life, their Christian journey of conversion towards God, is going to be wrestling with temptation. So that's the ordinary. And we shouldn't be, scared by that or thinking like, oh, there's demons around tempting me, and now I need to, every time I have an intrusive thought that's negative, I need to think it's a demon and start praying deliverance prayers. We need to realize this has always been the case. We've always been tempted our entire lives. It's kind of like learning that bacteria exists, and somebody tells you there's this invisible thing that's everywhere, and if it gets on you or in you, it can make you really sick or even kill you. That's a scary idea when you say it that way, but then we realize, well, we've been exposed to bacteria our entire lives, and it's nothing new. So it's the same way with the demons and temptation. We don't need to get really worked up about it. We do need to focus on, the spiritual life. And if you want to look at a fairly advanced book on how to deal with temptation, you could look at Evagrius's book, Talking Back. He was a desert father who wrote a whole book. It was actually in the form of a letter about countering the various temptations in the mind. Okay, so that's kind of the zero level. The first level that the church talks about is infestation, specifically demonic infestation, and that's when demons get the right to do extraordinary things in a place. Again, because of temptation, they're around. It's not like they're not going to be somewhere. They're not omnipresent, but you can kind of assume they're around in most of the world. Demonic infestation is when they can do extraordinary things beyond temptation in a place, and that's like things being thrown around, black shadows that you can't explain, strange odors that can't be explained, people may be getting scratched or punched or, assaulted in some way while they're in that space only. So that would be an infestation, repetitive bad nightmares, that type of thing. Now, just because you have nightmares doesn't mean your house is demonically infested, right? So when we see that going on, we also see attacks on holy objects that are preternatural in nature, where we don't see whatever is attacking them. So that's demonic infestation, and the church deals with that. Number one, a thorough house blessing, removing anything that's associated with the occult, and sometimes doing the minor exorcism that Pope Leo XIII wrote, if the bishop approves it. Okay, then we move on to the second level.
Wait, can I stop you for just 1 second? Because I'm just go back to the, go back to temptation and then infestation. But temptation, when you said the ordinary, you said not normal, ordinary activity that God permits or God allows. the why behind that, just because if we have new listeners or those that aren't Catholic or just looking into the Christian faith, why does God allow that ordinary activity? And then infestation, you said something about recurring nightmares, something of that nature. Go back to those two things and be specific, because there are a lot of people that maybe they're under stress or something of that nature that might have these kinds of things happening.
Sure. So, the reason God allows temptation, we can go back to the garden in Genesis, the original story of Adam and Eve, and the serpent enters the garden and tempts Eve to eat the apple that has been forbidden by God and basically break God's law. So from the very beginning, we see that God allows temptation. I think one way to look at temptation is it is a way to spur us to spiritually mature, and often emotionally mature and psychologically mature, but mainly spiritually to mature. When we're tempted by something, we have to wrestle with the thought of doing it or not doing it. And if we give in to it, we then deal with the consequences of that choice. It's often in life our failings, the places that we've made mistakes or kind of fallen down in life, produce the most wisdom. If you think back on your life, it's often the times that you made a really bad mistake that you learned a great lesson, and maybe you don't do those things anymore. So temptation kind of serves a purpose in God's permissive will, that it spurs us to spiritual maturity, hopefully, eventually. The other thing is that it shows us when we do fall and we experience the fruits of sin, which is, of course, spiritual death in the case of mortal sin, it spurs us on to realize the goodness of God. So when we are tempted, and when we're tempted in sin, and we taste the fruits of sin, and we see that they're bitter, and they're not good, and they don't lead to life, it helps us understand the difference between that and God, and how good God is. And so it puts God into contrast with evil in a way that also leads to some spiritual maturation, I think. That's one positive way to look at temptation. The other way to look at it is just the side effect of the fall in the garden, and that the world became tainted by original sin. All of creation, the physical creation here, was corrupted. Satan is present to a certain extent within it. He's the prince of this world, all of those types of phrases. He's not the king, right? There's only one king, and that's Jesus. That's God. But through the fall, he has some dominion, some limited dominion. And by the way, of course, God has to allow everything that he does, just like in the book of Job. He's not running around like a little mini God doing whatever he wants. And so temptation is kind of a side effect of the presence of the fallen angels that fell with him. Does that help, Deb?
Oh yeah, it's amazing. In fact, I'm taking notes as you're speaking because I think this is really helpful. I mean, I've heard you talk about this many times, but each time you do, I pick up something different that I think can be applied to all of us, and we can understand it right away, and how possibly we should perceive it, or how we should deal with things. So I thank you for going over this again for all of us. But go ahead. So now infestation and these nightmares or things, sleep disturbances that may be happening.
Yeah, so demonic infestation, again, when they get the basically the right to do extraordinary things in a place, that right has to be given to them by somebody who had authority over the place. So a person walking down the street can't just wiggle their fingers and mutter some words and send a demon into a house because they want to. It's somebody who has authority over that home or that building has to invite it in. The other way that they can become active in a home in this way is if a cursed object is brought into the home. And so in that case, they are associated, or you could think of it as attached, but that's not really the right word because they're not physical, but they're associated with this object. You bring the object into your home, and because the spirit is with that object, it then can act up in your home because the object is there. When the object is removed, everything stops. So those are two routes to demonic infestation. One through direct invitation, and the other through bringing a cursed object in. And then, as we said, the church, these are the most common of the extraordinary demonic cases. And the church deals with this through thorough house blessing, removing any cursed objects or objects associated with the occult and black magic, helping the family to get their prayer life in order, try to, counsel people to live well, to pray within the family is very important. And then, if necessary, doing the minor exorcism over the home. And that is the minor exorcism written by Pope Leo XIII in 1890, which was basically the full version of the St. Michael prayer that most people are familiar with. The St. Michael prayer is actually a kind of a subset and a watered-down version of the minor exorcism.
So this minor exorcism can only be done by whom?
This can only be done by priests, and they have to have permission from their bishop to do it.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. That's interesting, because I've seen some podcasts talking about the minor exorcism. That's interesting. You work in this ministry, in this work, you've been doing it for a long time. So the terms, the kind of scenarios, things that could happen, and what the remedy is so natural to you as you talk about it. But for the rest of us, it's pretty unique. So is there anything we're missing? I mean, I'm trying to get you to kind of go into that role of being brand new at this and looking at it for the first time. Like, maybe think about all the questions that you used to get early on from people, like, what is this, what exactly does this mean? And can this be impacting my life? Keep that in mind as you continue on with this discussion and this presentation, actually, about the levels of demonic activity.
Mm-hmm. So the next one, and we're going to see how they kind of can blend together with this, is oppression, sometimes translated as obsession. So you'll hear it, those words used interchangeably to a certain extent, and then some people will parse them out into attacks on the body versus attacks on the mind. But to my understanding, it's just a translation issue from the Latin obsessio, either into oppression or obsession, depending on the translator. But what it boils down to, Deb, is instead of all the fancy words, it's just a personal attack on an individual. Now, if an individual is in a home that has a demonic infestation, they may experience repetitive nightmares that are of a demonic, kind of character every time that they sleep. And as you were mentioning before, nightmares doesn't mean you have a demonic infestation in your home. Nightmares can be a manifestation of stress in your life. They can come from different things. They can come from something that you ate. So, an attack on the person. If you're in the home and you're being attacked, scratched, repetitive nightmares, that type of thing, you would say, well, that sounds like oppression of the person. But it's because you're in the home that has a demonic infestation. When you leave the home, you're completely fine. So it really isn't oppression of the person formally, because it's more that you were in the environment that they were in the home. Now, if the person is being attacked, scratched, repetitive nightmares, hearing whispering voices, and it goes with them wherever they go, not just in the home, now it's more properly demonic oppression, where the goal there is to basically torture the person and wear them down. And so they will become sleep deprived. Their body will be attacked in different ways, some of which are too disturbing to talk about on the radio, but you can imagine. But, physical in terms of hitting, biting, scratching from invisible things, the torment of not being able to sleep and the repetitive dreams, maybe hearing the whispering voices again, saying very negative things. Now, footnote on that, of course, is some mental illness causes you to hear voices, like schizophrenia or manic depression with psychotic features. So you want to be careful about assuming that something's spiritual or demonic. You don't want to jump to that hypothesis without ruling out the medical first. So oppression or obsession, it's an attack on the person that's extraordinary. It's beyond temptation. Now, our final one is possession, which is the one that most people want to hear about because it's in the movies and it's very dramatic. And that is when the demon gains the right to take over what Thomas Aquinas would call are the lower faculties, and that is the body and the emotions. So the use of the reason is not ever controlled. It may be suppressed in terms of blacking out or forgetting what you were going to say, but you can't be forced to choose things. God doesn't allow that, because reason is a central feature of having a rational life, and the choice between God and sin, God's law and breaking that law and sinning. So God doesn't allow them to make choices for you. You may black out and they use the body for a period of time, but you're not doing those things. That's not you doing them in terms of your will. So possession, as you mentioned at the outset, Deb, hyper rare, meaning, we might see 1 or 2 new cases in an entire diocese in a year. So possession generally comes from pretty serious black magic, cutting deals with demons. It could come from serious black magic that was done by the parents or the grandparents, but generally that is restrained until the person can grow to the age of reason and choose whether to sin or not in the ways that brought the demon into the family, its specialty, so to speak. And so God, in his love, doesn't allow, it's incredibly rare to see a child become possessed. He lets the person grow up, essentially, and make their own choice. Even though the demon may be present, he doesn't allow it to take over the body or even affect them very much until they can choose whether to sin or not. Now, of course, possession is treated with exorcism, which everybody's seen in the movies. In that case, it's a solemn exorcism, originally written in 1614, which was kind of a best of all of the methods from around the world at the time, and it became a universal book. There was regional exorcism books written by different people around the world, and the church kind of standardized it in 1614. And then that has been revised in 1999, so we both have the old and the new rite of exorcism now.
Wow, this is fascinating. Like I said, I've heard this so many times from you in the work that we do on the spirit world, but each and every time you share it with us, I learn something new. I have many more questions to ask. We're going to have to revisit this because I think other people are probably thinking some things in their head or trying to formulate some questions. Actually, you can always they can ask their questions on our next open forum show that's coming up in July. So I think that would be wonderful. On the spirit world. But Adam, that really does help. One last thing, just to reiterate, possession is very rare. People should not jump to that conclusion. They should definitely go see their doctor first, and have all sorts of testing done to make sure it's not something else. Correct? Just I want to give them, because we hear a lot. People will say, I'm having a feeling that somebody's possessed. It's risen to that level. One more time.
Yeah. Possession is a very serious thing. It's rare. It's like 1 or 2 new cases in an entire year in a major city or a diocese. Just because somebody's not behaving the way you like, I hear that sometimes, they got mean, so they must be possessed, or they're not listening to me anymore, so they must be possessed. It's way beyond that. You're talking about a very serious problem. And
real quickly, we only got 30 seconds. And why would God allow it to escalate up to possession from temptation?
God allows the extraordinary demonic things to hurt us because he wants us to wake up and realize these creatures are not our friends and turn back to him.
Okay.
So possession is a corrective experience for you. You cut a deal with the devil, or you said yes to the devil in a big way, and I want you to realize he's a monster and come back to me and repent.
Okay, so get in a state of grace, stay in a state of grace. That's the next right thing, right, Adam?
Exactly. You got it, Deb.
Okay, we're going to send it back to Keith for the rest of Morning Joy.